From the late 18th century, India was under British rule. Alongside a British India administered by British officials, the empire included some 562 princely states, ruled by Hindu Maharajas and Muslim Nawabs. Stanislas Antonowicz would immortalize both sides of this empire. His photographs reveal an era, that of India in the 1930s, and a specific viewpoint, that of a Frenchman relocated to the heart of the British colonial empire at a time when the desire for independence was beginning to gain momentum.
With a law degree in hand and no fixed address other than the poste restante, I left behind my family to become a traveling salesman throughout Europe. But I wasn't working for just anyone. I was in the service of Michelin and the legendary Michelin Man. Traveling had become a family tradition. My grandfather was born in Poland, my father in Beirut, and I was born in Constantinople. In 1914, we fled the Ottoman Empire and settled in Marseille. This photo of me and my three brothers was practically the only thing we were able to take with us. And then in 1928, Michelin appointed me as its authorized signatory in the Indian Empire. I was 24 years old, and images from Kipling's books were fresh in my mind. I accepted without the slightest hesitation. As soon as I arrived in Bombay, I bought the latest model Studebaker Director Royal sedan, a supply of film from Kodak, and the adventure began. At first, I wondered if Michelin was pulling my leg. There were hundreds of carts and wagons, all jostling for space among indescribable chaos. But there wasn't a car to be seen. Who was I going to sell my tyres to? I set up my office in Bombay. One of my colleagues, Bill, was a jovial, ruddy-faced Englishman who thought that the French all ate frogs for breakfast. No matter how hard I tried to convince him otherwise, he just didn't want to hear it. He lived with his wife in a colonial bungalow run by servant boys. He was never satisfied with them and thought they were sly and thieving. My job was to establish depots across a territory the size of Europe. Bill wished me luck. I bought a few maps and all the necessary bits and bobs, and I was ready to go. I opened the first depot in Delhi. To celebrate the occasion, one of my Muslim clients offered to accompany me to the Grand Mosque. The square was abuzz with activity. It was like a fairground. This was travel from another era. Even though roads were starting to be built, they were not always in the condition you might expect. You were well advised to have good tyres, Michelin, of course. I used publicity cards for advertising my tyres. Everywhere we went, we drew crowds of curious passers-by. I was always struck by the squalor, the noise, and the pungent and contrasting smells, but was given an enthusiastic welcome without fail. Once back in Bombay, I even organised a gymkhana to showcase the quality of our materials. Bill, who loved fast cars, insisted on driving. He went so fast that he ended up head over heels. Luckily, no damage was done.
India at the time had a population of 350 million, mostly Hindus and Muslims. Three leaders represented the claims of the Indian elite in the Indian National Congress. Two Hindus, Gandhi and Nehru, and a Muslim, Ali Jinnah. All three were fighting for India to obtain the status of a dominion, that is, a self-governing state that would remain subject to British sovereignty for its international relations. Gandhi's aim was to achieve this without violence. From his ashram, he launched a campaign of non-cooperation and civil disobedience. During a one-day general strike, he called on his followers to fast, pray, and boycott English-made goods. But violence broke out. To put a stop to the violence, he began a hunger strike and suspended his campaign.
Bill and I were on our way to set up a new depot. It was going to be a long day. The heat was intense and humidity was high. We had been driving for 3 hours, and Bill, grumbling the whole way, had already changed his shirt 3 times. But the road, or rather the lack of a road, gave him the perfect opportunity to cool off. Not that this stopped him complaining, this time about how slowly things were moving. To distract him, I gave him my camera. It's true that the job took so long that we could have enough time to kill a donkey with soft figs, as one of my local provincial expressions would have it. I tried to distract Bill with my unusual metaphor, but without luck. Whenever I could, I would meet Bill in the peace and calm of the Breach Candy Club, which was for Europeans only. I made many friends there, relationships, and more relationships. Michelin was outperforming all its competitors. We would go swimming in unisex bathing costumes, or have a few drinks while describing our servant boys' latest blunders. There were beautiful women, sometimes witty, always elegant. We would exchange glances, and sometimes more. I knew how to charm them. I made them laugh. I was Stan, the little Frenchman, so funny. They loved a clown. And like everyone in the club, they couldn't care less about the political unrest, news of which never made it past the entrance.
In late 1929, as the status of a dominion had not been granted, the Indian National Congress solemnly stated the inalienable right of the Indian people to have freedom. It now demanded total independence. Gandhi launched an action by calling for a strike on the British salt tax. On the 12th of March 1930, he left his ashram at the head of 80 volunteers and was soon joined by thousands of others. After having marched 350 kilometers, he arrived at a beach where he symbolically collected a few salt crystals. He invited Indians across the country to fill containers and evaporate water to collect the salt. Gandhi's arrest did nothing to slow down the movement. Negotiations began. On the 5th of March 1931, the British salt privileges were revoked, and political prisoners who had not committed violence were freed.
To my dear father, having left for India without the slightest illusion, I have not had the opportunity to be disillusioned. The most surprising thing is the presence of people everywhere. You imagine yourself to be in total solitude and then notice a Hindu slowly walking past, apparently aimlessly and with no objective in particular. The characteristics of the Hindus in my region is their hatred towards Muslims, which is reciprocated, a complete unawareness of the passage of time, and the ability to sleep whilst being awake. And so while driving through the streets, you may sound the horn as much as you like, there will always be a daydreamer whom you must nudge with your bumper to arouse from his meditation. And even that doesn't prevent accidents. The English amazed me. They love sport, all sport, even the most outrageous, such as the 100-meter sprint dressed in a suit, the egg and spoon race, or the nautical mile using your foot as a paddle. But the most celebrated event was the tiger hunt. "It's very exciting," said Bill. And he offered to take me along on one. I took my courage in both hands and said yes. Even though we were armed, we were still very cautious. You really had to keep your cool. Bill was experienced, however, and didn't miss the mark. That evening I was exhausted. I accompanied him to the club. Bill was keen to describe our exploits, especially his own. All of a sudden, in my sights, a figure suddenly appeared, and Bill's tiger became the furthest thing from my mind. Her name was Pauline. She was from Alsace in eastern France and worked as a reporter for a German magazine. I provided a commentary to Bill's exploits. Well, mostly my own. I blew my own trumpet, it might be said. With her trousers, she was nothing like the elegant English ladies at the club who looked askance at her while she confidently proclaimed her admiration for Gandhi.
Gandhi was invited to London to participate in a round table on India's political future. Dressed in a loincloth and shawl, he arrived in the English capital in September 1931. Opposed to any change to the status quo, Churchill mocked Gandhi, calling him a half-naked fakir, who thought he could parley on equal terms with the representative of the King Emperor. An independent India, went on Churchill, would mean unemployment in England and civil war in India.
Pauline fascinated me. She was the very model of an adventurer. A friend and I helped her organize an expedition for her magazine that would take her to Sikkim, a small independent kingdom next to Tibet. When, lo and behold, she issued a challenge and I suggested I accompany her. It was exactly the kind of invitation I liked, so I took up her proposition. I dealt with my urgent business and temporarily handed the keys to the Michelin kingdom over to Bill. 1 week later, we arrived in Gangtok, the capital of Sikkim. Pauline haggled proficiently over the hiring of mules and porters. As a connoisseur of Oriental business methods, I applauded her skills. She cut a fine figure, while I merely tried to look dignified. I put on a brave face. After several days of walking, we arrived in a monastery. The head lama gave us a warm welcome. With his American cigarettes and cowboy hat, I admit I had trouble believing him when he said he was the brother of the 13th Dalai Lama. We attended sacred dances that were being filmed by a crew of English filmmakers. Pauline took notes. For the occasion, just like the head lama, I dressed up to the nines, which is one of those strange sayings we have. The dances told the story of Yama, the god of the dead, and Showa, the god of the spirit. But the details were as impenetrable to me as the origins of some of our own expressions. Pauline woke me up early in the morning. I would have happily stayed in bed. For the next part of her report, she wanted to go to the base camp of the Houston-Gormont English expedition, which was attempting to be the first to scale Mount Everest. I asked her why she wished to do such a thing. It's not as if you can see New York from the summit. And while we're at it, why not try to fly to the moon? Really, Stan? She said, laughing. You don't understand at all, do you? I might not have understood anything at all, but I did see how difficult the trip would be. The altitude, the cold, the elevation gain, the days of walking and uncomfortable nights all contributed to our great fatigue. But the more I suffered, the more I realized I would brave any danger for her. With a bit of spade work, we crossed Natula, a mountain pass situated at 4,310 meters altitude. An ethnic group who lived there gave us food and sustenance. And then another put us up for the night. The altitude made us short of breath. We were only able to climb between 200 and 300 meters a day. At 6,000 meters altitude, we came across our first glaciers. I would make myself scared. To impress Pauline, I would fool around, going right up close to crevices. She grabbed my camera and pressed the button. I could see her feelings for me were developing. Just then, a Sherpa from the Houston Gourmand expedition appeared in sight. He was the bearer of bad news. 4 members of the expedition had set up a bivouac at 8,550 meters, the highest altitude a mountaineer has so far managed to achieve. But they would have had to struggle for a further 20 hours to reach the summit, so they'd given up. All we could do now was turn back. But neither of us had the slightest desire to return to Bombay. We took our time coming down and gradually shared our feelings for one another. Once back in the valley, Pauline decided she was not going to return to Europe.
The London conference failed due to dissent among the Indian delegation. The British took the opportunity to maintain the status quo. Against the advice of Gandhi, Ali Jinnah demanded that in the case of independence, India should be partitioned, with the creation of a Muslim state that he wanted to call Pakistan, the land of the pure. Rulers of the princely states were against the idea of a federal state that would call into question their privileges.
Once we arrived in Bombay, Pauline wrote her report. It was soon published. I threw myself into the task of writing a thesis on the princely states. A doctorate is always useful. We made the most of Bill, who was managing my teams brilliantly, and set off at the wheel of my faithful Studebaker to visit several of the states. In Mysore, we were present for the Durbar. A spectacular ceremony in which monarchs of the princely states reaffirmed their loyalty to the British Crown. Pauline saw only the serving of interests in this supposed loyalty. We also visited the state of Bikaner, where 3/4 of the state's budget was allocated to the Maharaja's personal expenses. He tamed panthers and spent a fortune on the upkeep of his kennels, but his state had no hospital and education was non-existent. Pauline was outraged, as was I. The days of the Breach Candy Club seemed far away. Now it was for an entirely different audience that I acted the clown.
Tension was increasing within the Indian National Congress. At the Karachi Congress, Gandhi and Nehru, threatened by Muslim extremists, were forced to arrive under tight security. Gandhi tried to maintain unity, and on the 28th of December 1931, he announced the return of the civil disobedience campaigns, but he was once again thrown in prison. Riots broke out throughout the country. These protests set Indians against the British, but also Hindus against Muslims. Repression by the British and division among the Indians temporarily put a halt to any hopes of independence.
This political instability did not prevent Michelin from thriving. Over the course of several months, Pauline and I traveled many thousands of kilometers for my job. In the north, we opened depots in Afghanistan, despite growing tensions and conflict. In the east, we went all the way to Burma. We took advantage of these work trips to go sightseeing, in almost total isolation, with only the odd Hindu. They were always happy to take photos of us. There was not an Englishman to be seen. It was as if the wonders of India didn't interest them. I just couldn't believe it. We were continually tempted to set off and discover a new corner. I often linger over this photo of Pauline. Looking radiant, she is sitting under a banyan tree, a symbol of eternal life. Not long after we were back from one of our trips, she went for a drive with Bill, as usual. He must have been driving like a maniac. They died instantly. What else could I do? In my grief, other than leave this country that I had come to both love and hate. I resigned from Michelin and left India.
After the Second World War, Churchill's surprise defeat in the elections brought new energy to the independence movement. London tasked the Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, with handing over power to the Indian National Congress. But the Muslims continued to campaign for the creation of Pakistan, and Gandhi in turn continued to refuse, incurring the hatred of extremists from both sides. On the 15th of August 1947, Ali Jinnah announced the independence of Pakistan and Nehru of India. Thus began an enormous transfer of people, with Hindus fleeing Pakistan and Muslims fleeing India. Massacres occurred, causing more than 500,000 deaths. 6 months later, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu extremist. By this time, Stan was continuing his adventures throughout the Far East. Since leaving India, his passport had steadily filled with visa stamps. But despite the countries he visited and the women he met, he did not forget Pauline. He never married, But his friends would see this photo on his bookshelf until the day he died.